board would not come to order. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Alderwoman Tyus, Alderwoman Middlebrook, Alderman Bosley, Alderman Moore, Alderwoman Hubbard, Alderwoman Ingracia, Alderman Kotar, Alderwoman Rice, Alderman Guenther, Alderman Vollmer, Alderwoman Martin, Alderman Arnowitz, Alderwoman Murphy, Alderwoman Howard, Alderwoman Green, Alderman Oldenburg, Alderman Rhodey, Alderman Todd, Alderwoman Davis, Alderwoman Spencer, Alderman Muhammad, Alderman Boyd, Alderman Vaccaro, Alderman Narayan, Alderman Cone, Alderwoman Clark Hubbard, Alderwoman Boyd, Alderwoman Navarro, President Reed,
Here.
Alderwoman Middlebrook, Alderman Bosley, Alderman Moore, Alderwoman Hubbard, Alderwoman Ingracia, Alderman Kotar, Alderwoman Murphy, Alderwoman Howard, Alderman Oldenburg, Alderman Rhodey, Alderwoman Davis, Alderwoman Spencer, Alderman Muhammad, Alderman Cone, Alderwoman Boyd, 18 present.
A quorum being present, we will be led today in prayer by Pastor Robert Lloyd of New Perfect Peace Baptist Church. He also has with him today Deacon Farrakhan Shagag. I've watched this young man since he was in high school, and he has just been a treasure to watch grow and do great things throughout our community. So please join me in welcoming them as they lead us in prayer today.
Dear wise and loving Father, first, let me say thank you on behalf of all who are gathered here today. Thank you for your many and abundant blessings. Thank you for life itself, for the measure of health we need to fulfill our callings, for sustenance and for friendship. Thank you for the ability to be involved in useful work and for the honor of bearing appropriate responsibilities. Thank you as well for the freedom to embrace you or for the freedom to reject you. Thank you for loving us even so from your boundless and gracious nature. In the scriptures, you have said that citizens ought to obey the governing authorities, since you have established those very authorities to promote peace and order and justice. Therefore, I pray for our mayor and various levels of city officials, and in particular, this great assembly. I'm asking that you would graciously grant them the following: wisdom to govern amid the conflicting interests and issues of our times, a sense of the welfare and true needs of our people, a keen thirst for justice and righteousness, confidence in what is good and fitting, and the ability to work together in harmony even when there is honest disagreement, a personal peace in their lives and joy in their task. I pray for the agenda set before them today. Please give an assurance of what will please you and what will benefit those who live and work in and around our beloved city. In your most precious Son's name I pray, Jesus Christ, amen.
Join me in a round of applause for Pastor Lloyd and his deacon, Farrakhan. Join me in a round of applause for Farrakhan. We will dispense with line item 3, introduction of honored guests. Any introduction of honored guests? Alderwoman from the 26th.
Have as my, good morning, Mr. President, members of the board. I would like to have as my honored guest today the amazing, smart, talented, experienced Alderwoman from the 5th nieces, Atala Hubbard and Aisha Hubbard.
Oh, welcome. Alderman from the 24th. Can you do that one more time?
I'm sorry?
Yeah, do it one more time.
Oh.
I don't think.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to have as my honored guest the plumbers and pipe fitters from Local 562.
All right. Any further introductions? Any further introductions? Any further introductions? Alderman from the 4th.
Thank you, Mr. President and members of the board. I'd like to have as my special guest my awesome committee woman, Gwendolyn Evans.
Any further introductions? Any further introductions? Alderman from the 22nd, an introduction. Alderman from the 10th, like to wrap us up.
What nerve you have to stand up there.
He's only the floor leader.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. President, members of the board. As we're gathered here on October 18th, it was on this day of music, a lot of things happened. Paul McCartney and John Lennon played in public for the first time. In 1969, the Jackson 5 made their first TV appearance. I was 10 years old. But more importantly, October 18th is Meatloaf Appreciation Day. So everyone go out and say hi to your meatloaf today and thank them. Thank you.
Right, thank you, Alderman. Alderman from the introduction, excuse me, Alderman, approval of the minutes.
Mr. President, members of the board, I move for approval of the minutes of October 11, 2019.
Moved by Alderman from 22nd, seconded by Alderman from the 10th. Any discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Report of city officials.
Report of city officials can be found in A, B, and C of the agenda and has been placed in the aldermen's mailboxes.
We'll dispense with line item 7. Would anyone like to take any bills off of any of our informal calendars? Would anyone like to take any bills off of any of our informal calendars? We'll dispense with line item 8 through 10. First reading of board bills.
Board Bill 129, sponsored by Alderman Arnowitz, an ordinance authorizing and directing the Director of Department of Human Services on behalf of the City of St. Louis to accept a grant award from the Family and Community Trust in the amount of $35,000 from the No Kid Hungry Missouri School Year 19 Summer Special Grant Program to expend those funds as part of the City of St. Louis Child and Adult Care Food Program, After School Meal Program, and Summer Food Service Programs starting in the 2019-2020 school year as set forth in the grant agreement attached hereto as Exhibit A, appropriating said funds and authorizing the Director of Human Services upon approval of the Board of Estimate and Apportionment to expend such funds as permitted by the grant award agreement and containing an emergency clause. Board Bill 130, sponsored by Alderman Arnowitz, an ordinance adopting the Uniform Plumbing Code 2015 edition as the Plumbing Code of the City of St. Louis, repealing Ordinance 66615, which adopted the Uniform Plumbing Code 2013 edition, repealing Ordinance 61713, Ordinance 62610, Ordinance 62682, Ordinance 65031, and Ordinance 65932, all of which modify Ordinance 60826 and containing a penalty clause, a savings clause, and an emergency clause. Board Bill 131, sponsored by Alderman Guenther, an ordinance recommended by the Planning Commission on October 8, 2019, to change the zoning of property as indicated on district map in City Block 761 from K Unrestricted District to the J Industrial District at 423 Lynch Street so as to include the described parcel of land in City Block 761 and containing an emergency clause. Board Bill 132, sponsored by Alderwoman Hubbard, pursuant to Ordinance 68937, an ordinance authorizing the honorary street name of Karlie Kloss Way, which shall begin at the intersection of Washington Avenue and North 16th Street and run east on Washington Avenue at the intersection of Washington Avenue and North 15th Street. Board Bill 133, sponsored by Alderman Narayan, an ordinance recommended by the Planning Commission on October 8, 2019 to change the zoning of property as indicated on the district map from A, single-family dwelling district, to the C, multiple family dwelling district in City Block 4625.04, so as to include the described parcel of land in City Block 4625.04 and containing an emergency clause. Board Bill 134, sponsored by Alderwoman Spencer, an ordinance directing the installation of signs as specified in this ordinance, notifying individuals that City of St. Louis parks and parks facilities are child care facilities under Section 210.201 of the revised statutes of Missouri that as child care facilities, the possession and carrying of firearms are prohibited under Section 571.107 of the revised statutes of Missouri. That is the extent of first reading of board bills.
Madam Clerk, please place Board Bill 130 in Parks.
So noted.
And remove it from Health and Human Services. Reference to the committee.
To the Health and Human Services Committee, Board Bill 129. To the HUD's Committee, Board Bill 131 and 133. To the Streets Committee, Board Bill 132. And to the Parks Committee, Board Bill 130 and 134.
Excuse me, they actually wanted Board Bill 130 in Public Safety.
So noted. So that was to the Health and Human Services Committee, Board Bill 129. To Public Safety, Board Bill 130. To HUD's, Board Bill 131 and 133. To the Streets Committee, Board Bill 132. And to the Parks Committee, Board Bill 134. That is the extent of reference to committee.
Second reading.
The following board bills were reported out of Public Safety. Board Bill 106, sponsored by President Reed and the following alderpersons: Vaccaro, Davis, Coder, Middlebrook, Clark, Hubbard, Muhammad, Murphy, Pam Boyd, Rice, and Gracia, Hubbard, Howard, and Jeffrey Boyd. An ordinance establishing reporting requirements for licensees selling firearms to report failures of background check system when a firearm purchase is denied within the limits of City of St. Louis, containing a severability and containing an emergency clause. Board Bill 107, sponsored by Alderman Muhammad, Alderwoman Tyus, and Alderman Vaccaro, an ordinance directing that the City of St. Louis Division of Police establish 9 police districts, the boundaries of which shall be drawn in accordance with the map set forth in Exhibit A attached hereto, and to the extent the Commissioner of the City of St. Louis Division of Police deems reasonable and appropriate in light of changing community and law enforcement needs. Division of Police resources, including officers, shall be appropriated equally amongst the 9 police districts and each police district. Board Bill 128, sponsored by Alderman Muhammad, an ordinance prohibiting the issuance of any packaged or drink liquor license for any currently non-licensed premises within the boundaries of the 21st Ward Liquor Control District as established herein for a period of 5 years from the effective date hereof, containing exceptions and allowing during the moratorium period for the limited transfer of existing license under certain circumstances and renewal of existing licenses. The following board bills were reported out of the HUD's Committee. Board Bill 104, sponsored by Alderwoman Howard, an ordinance amending the redevelopment plan for the Gravois Morgan Ford redevelopment area approved by Ordinance 65177 dated February the 27th, 2001 by modifying the terms of real estate tax abatement and extending the implementation schedule, now calling for projects to be completed by September 30th, 2029. Board Bill 111, sponsored by Alderman Rhodey, an ordinance approving a redevelopment plan for 4545 through 4559 Laclede Avenue area. Board Bill 126, sponsored by Alderman Rhodey, an ordinance to submit a 2020 annual action plan to the United States Department of Housing and Urban Development as required to apply for funding under the Community Development Block Agreement, Home Investment Partnership, Emergency Solutions Grant, and Housing Opportunities for Persons with AIDS, entitlement programs, authorizing and directing the mayor and comptroller on behalf of the City of St. Louis to enter into and execute agreements with HUD for the receipts of 2020 CDBG, Home, ESG, and HOPWA funds. Board Bill 127, sponsored by Alderwoman Clark Hubbard, an ordinance amending the redevelopment plan for the West End redevelopment area approved by Ordinance 64392, dated June 25, 1998, by adding the implementation schedule now calling for projects to be completed by May 1st, 2029. That is the extent of second reading report of standing committees.
Dispense with line items 14 through 16, third reading and consent.
Board Bill 116, Committee Sub, Board Bill 90, Board Bill 85 as amended, and Board Bill 112.
Alderman from the 22nd, you recognize on the motion for the third reading consent calendar.
Mr. President, members of the board, I move for adoption of third reading consent calendar.
It's been moved by the Alderman from the 22nd, seconded by the Alderman from the 10th. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Alderwoman Tyus. Alderwoman Middlebrook. Alderman Bosley. Alderman Moore. Alderwoman Hubbard. Alderwoman Ingracia. Alderman Kotar. Alderwoman Rice. Alderman Guenther. Alderman Vollmer. Alderwoman Martin. Alderman Arnowitz. Alderwoman Murphy. Alderwoman Howard. Alderwoman Green. Alderman Oldenburg. Alderman Rhodey. Alderman Todd. Alderwoman Davis. Alderwoman Spencer. Alderman Muhammad. Alderman Boyd. Alderman Vaccaro. Alderman Narayan. Alderman Cone. Alderwoman Clark Hubbard. Alderwoman Boyd. Alderwoman Navarro. President Reed.
Aye.
Alderwoman Middlebrook. Alderman Bosley. Alderman Kotar. Alderman Oldenburg. Alderman Boyd. Alderman Cone. 25 aye votes.
By your vote, staying the motion of the Alderman from the 22nd, third read, and finally passed the aforementioned bills. Third reading report of engrossments.
Board Bill 103 as amended, sponsored by Alderwoman Hubbard and Alderman Muhammad. An ordinance authorizing the execution of amended and restated parcel development agreement by and among the City of St. Louis, Missouri, Northside Regeneration, LLC, and Northside Urgent Care Property, LLC, NSQALICB, LLC, and HGP Hospital Court, prescribing the form and details of said amended and restated parcel development agreement, authorizing certain actions by city officials and containing that severability clause.
Alderwoman from the 5th, you recognize on third reading final passage of Board Bill 103 as amended.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of the board. I rise in support of third reading and final passage of Board Bill 103 as amended. This is the health. Sorry. I'm distracted. It's a lot of noise over here right now.
Would you like to make a motion for a third reading, final passage of Board
Yes,
Bill
I would like to make a motion to third reading and finally pass Board Bill 103 as amended.
Moved by the Alderwoman from the 5th, seconded by the Alderwoman from the 1st. Alderwoman, please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of the board. Board Bill 103 103 as amended is the Health Works bill. It's regarding the hospital in North St. Louis is one that we've been working on for over 5 years. This is just the new bill that authorizes the execution of the redevelopment agreement. I think we've been all talked out on it. It's been a long road, but we definitely need a hospital in North St. Louis, in an area that has high rates of hypertension. It has the most Medicaid recipients within the entire city, least life expectancy, highest infant mortality rate, just basically every ailment that you can look at in the communities. The zip code 63106 is where this hospital will be built, and it's in that footprint. And on a bigger level, this will be the only hospital in North St. Louis, and we've worked really hard on it for the past 3 years. It's given us an opportunity to redevelop a site that has sat underdeveloped since 1976. That was a year before I was born. And it's given us the opportunity to definitely make some good strides. For some time, the area has sat vacant. A huge chunk of the TIF that's associated with this bill will definitely go for infrastructure for roads so that ambulances and fire trucks can have access to the site to assist with the hospital. This will be more than just a 3-bedroom urgent care hospital. It has a phase 2 connected to it, which will be a healthcare village, and just offers so many needs and services to people who have lived in an impoverished community for in excess of 60 years because the city has failed them and not given them the resources that they need to live in a viable, workable community with access to health care. So it's been a long road. I know it's been met with a lot of resistance, but I'm confident that we all were able to sit down and hash some of these things out. And I definitely wanted to just say this publicly. Since last week or 2 weeks ago when we got the bill through committee, there has been so much negative fodder out there and suggestions and innuendos in the media, like people have been doing things that aren't above board in regard to this project, and I just find that very disheartening. And I just say that when other people in other parts of the city carry legislation, you don't dig into their campaign reports to act as if they're not doing something right. But that type of commentary is a testament to the racial divide that exists in this city, and it's so much so that I just can't even fathom how anyone would spread something bad regarding the only hospital in North St. Louis. In our community, we don't have the luxury to go to Barnes or go to Mobap or do all that kind of stuff. People in my community can't even afford to catch the bus to go to the hospital, to go to the Central Corridor to a hospital. So this issue is one that has been near and dear to my heart. It's been definitely near and dear to my constituents because they are the ones that have been suffering. And when you just look at that whole footprint of the area that I represent, median incomes are less than 18,000. Most households are female-headed households, unbanked population. So every ailment that you can think of, or some of the worst demographics in the city, reside right there in the 5th Ward. And so we've been working very hard, and I just hope as a city we can get past this boogeyman of a developer and all this rhetoric that we put out there, because our constituents are dependent on us to lead. And I just hope that we can get past it, because when we don't make decisions, because we don't like a particular developer, then it's bigger than that developer. It's keeping the whole city back, because if we don't adequately address the issues that are taking place in North St. Louis, then those very same issues are going to be on every doorstep, downtown, Central Corridor, and South St. Louis. So it's my hope that we can get past that as a body, as a city. I hope that we can start allocating more resources to North St. Louis, and I wouldn't care if it's Paul McKee or whomever. I've said this since day one, since I took the oath. Whoever is trying to invest and redevelop in my community, I'm open for business. And so with that, I'll take any questions regarding the project, but I just hope that we can move forward and get past all these hurdles so we can bring adequate health care to North St. Louis. Thank you.
Alderwoman from the 6th.
Thank you, Mr. President. Will the Alderwoman of the 5th yield for questions?
Alderwoman from the 5th will yield the questions. Alderwoman from the 6th. Alderwoman from the 6th, please proceed.
Will the urgent care center accept Medicaid as payment for services?
I'm almost sure that it will, but don't quote me on that. In that footprint, they probably would go out of business if they didn't accept Medicaid.
Okay. Do you mind if I reach out to SLDC while we discuss this to just confirm that?
Sure, you can.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Any further? Alderman from the first.
Mr. President, members of the board, I just want to get up and say that you can have problems with a developer and not have problems with the project. Since I've been down here, I've been fighting for things that have been missing in my community. It's why we have a grocery store. It's why we have a Walgreens. We're working on a hardware store right now. It took us 12 years to get a Walgreens while they were putting Walgreens at every other corner. So I'm fortunate enough that my community lives 5 minutes. My community lives 5 minutes from Barnes. So we don't, even though we don't have a hospital right there, we have direct access to it. I am very familiar with your community. I own property down there. I come down there all the time. And so I know the things that are missing. And I know how hard it is to try to get things. I am mostly not a person who supports TIFs or a lot of tax abatement and things like that, except for places that need it. And I know that your community needs it. And I know it's hurtful sometimes when people attack you because it's hard to prove what you're not. And people put things out there, and then you have to say, I'm not, but it's hard to prove a negative. So I just want to get up, and I want to commend you for continuing to fight for the hospital, urgent care, whatever you want to call it, whichever one you need it. And you have to just keep going, and then make another list of something else you need, and keep going. I was here when they first built the Snooks down in your community. Then they closed the brand new Snooks back up and tore it down. Then they put one further downtown, a little small bodega kind of thing. But that's not really servicing your community. You build a gas station with a grocery store onto it. You build a grocery store, okay? Those are things that people take for granted that they have, and then they don't understand. When I sit up here and talk about a hardware store, there's no hardware store in all of North St. Louis. And not only that, we drove all the way out Natural Bridge. There's not one out in North County past Umsel. So when you go, if you would drive your community, you would know that she is speaking from her heart when she says, my community needs this. And so I'm proud to vote for this, and I'm proud that I hear your voice, because you know I always encourage you, put that voice out there. You have something to say, and you're speaking for your community, and I commend you, and I am looking forward to voting yes.
Alderman from the 23rd.
This is what TIFs and tax abatements were meant to be. I was just going to suggest maybe you should move your ward to downtown or the Central West End, where you can give millionaires and billionaires TIFs all day long and nobody cares. This hospital's needed in that neighborhood. You know your neighborhood. You know I have a lot of respect for you. And I'm just saying, this is what TIFs and tax abatement were meant to be in. They're not necessarily meant to be in my ward, and we do very little, if any, in my ward. But I do commend you, and I do respect you, and I did want to say something.
Thank you.
Alderwoman from the 8th.
Thank you, Mr. President. Will the Alderwoman from the 5th yield for questions?
Alderwoman from the 5th, we yield for question. Alderwoman from the 8th, please proceed.
Thanks. I wanted to get a little bit more information, if you could, about the hospital. And I know the Alderwoman from the 6th asked about Medicaid. But doing a little bit of research into freestanding ERs, and it's a problem that happens with urgent cares as well, is that sometimes the bills get way bigger than they would coming through a normal hospital system. So I guess, question, are they going to be affiliated or connected in any way with any of our other hospitals here in town?
So I do know that, for one, I just got confirmation they will accept Medicaid. Secondly, I believe the CEO of the hospital is the former CEO of MOBAB. Of the maybe last 4 3-bedroom hospital urgent cares that have been done in the entire state, this one is going to be done by the same person that did that one. And I'm not sure if they're going to be like attached to SSM or anything like that. But in committee, when we had every aspect of the hospital, the doctors, the developer, the financer, everybody, they would have been better suited to answer those questions, because this is something that has been going on for 5 years. This bill does nothing more than specifically change the dates of the redevelopment agreement. And so I probably can give you some information and give you some, but I think it's a standalone. I don't think it's attached to any other anchor medical facilities in the city.
I understand, and I wasn't here 5 years ago, so I'm trying to catch up on that now. There have been concerns raised again about medical bills, and that in this type of a hospital around in rural Missouri and in rural areas of the country and other inner cities where they're filling in this space where hospitals are not serving. Patients are getting hit with astronomical medical bills coming out of them that they wouldn't get if they were in a hospital. So it's one of those that we don't currently have a hospital serving, but also if the care is going to come attached with a massive medical bill that is going to then bankrupt folks. Is it a nonprofit hospital, or is
so it has a non-for-profit arm attached to it? But okay. I will say this, and with all due respect, Alderwoman of the 8th, we have looked at this thing from inside and out. I would never make a decision that will put an undue hardship on my constituents. These are some of the most vulnerable constituents in the entire state, and so the developers have looked at it. All the people that are involved financially have looked in. I mean, the carpenters are investing $4 million into this project. So there's so many hands on deck just trying to make this thing work. They would never do anything. Like their business model wouldn't permit them to do something that would disproportionately impact this community, because ultimately this is a community who has no money. Right. They have no resources, and they're in the business to make money, but they're in the business to sustain themselves. And so when you come into an impoverished footprint such as this, you look at all of that type of stuff. Now, I may not be qualified because I'm not a medical expert. I'm not a financier to, dig in at that level, but I'm pretty sure had you been in committee or had you posed those questions, and you still can, they'll answer whatever question you have regarding the finances, regarding any adverse effect it could have on the community. But I can stand here before you and tell you that this is about access to health care for people who are eligible for Medicaid, who they're trying to make this work. This is not a big business project for somebody to get rich or anything like that. This is to fill a void in our community that we've experienced since Homer G. Phillips closed in North St. Louis, which was a tragedy for the city of St. Louis to let the only hospital in this country that served African-American doctors and nurses, that trained them. So this is our opportunity to do so many things right on a lot of levels, and I definitely appreciate your concern in regards to thinking about how this will affect the population surrounding. But I mean, you can't bankrupt the person if they don't have anything already. So that's not an issue here.
Okay. Thank you. That's helpful. The other question I have is there a way to sort of briefly overview why the financial details didn't work a few years ago, where the investors are now getting the money from to be able to carry this forward in a way that they weren't able to before?
So if you can go and look at the hearing, the committee hearing, a lot of that stuff came out in the hearing. And just if you look at this site, of the Prohibiting site, this site is so toxic that residential could never be placed on that site. So it required brownfield tax credits. We all know the hurdles that have happened with Northside regeneration and just the lawsuits, the financing and all that. And so this is an element that we have not just on this site, but as far as development throughout the entirety of North St. Louis. You can have people on board ready to allocate their money and invest in the community, but then you'll have the city, our economic arm, sitting here holding stuff up. I mean, it was so crucial that I wish we could have gone into closed session to even get into the deep details of financing this project, because in the past, the same thing that went through with the grocery store, the city literally sat on their hands for months and delayed the project, and delayed it in such a way that we couldn't get access and everything in place to move forward. And it's a shiesty game of if I hold it long enough, then the investors will run off, and that has been happening. And I can't specifically speak to that in regards to this, but I do know that there has been delay. We had to have a committee meeting just to make SLDC start talking to the developer. So that's how bad off we have been with these projects in the 5th Ward. So, and that's as much as I can tell you about it. We delved into all the financials. I can give you access to those people if you have any additional questions for them. And
Okay. All right, sorry, and one more question I just thought of. At the hearing, there were questions raised about the ongoing lawsuit between the city and the developers. Is that affecting this property at all?
Not at all, and I think that's part of the big issue here with all of the legal stuff. I mean, when other development projects are going on throughout this city, or if they've ever stripped at anybody's redevelopment rights, that's not an issue we decide at the Board of Aldermen. That's not even really conversation for us. That's between the legal parties that are involved. And so what we have here is, when you get to talking about redevelopment rights, currently we shouldn't even be in the capacity to speak to that because it's still pending. It has no bearing on this project. That's a question that you can pose to the city councilor's office or maybe the mayor's office. They could better brief you on what's going on with the legal woes between the city and Northside Regeneration.
Okay, thank you, Alderwoman. And no further questions.
Thank you.
All right. Alderwoman for the 19th.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of the board. So I have no questions of the alderperson of the 5th Ward, but I do have a couple of comments. One of the things that we do have available to us at all times is the opportunity to talk with representatives of SLDC, the mayor's office, our city councilors, and the list goes on and on. The other part of this discussion that I'm not sure why everyone here thinks that they are so competent about how a healthcare facility is started, but I can tell you who is. The state of Missouri is very competent. And as was stated in the hearing, all certifications have been approved in order to move forward on this project. You just don't walk up one day and say, I'm going to build a trauma center, or I'm going to open an urgent care, or I'm going to open a health clinic. It just doesn't happen that way. There are federal and state guidelines that must be met, or you will be doing nothing. The other part to this is not about Paul McKee and the woes that we have had over the years, because if you think about it, point your finger at the city of St. Louis. Because you see, when I was fighting hard against the whole damn thing in the beginning in order for us to get it right, nobody wanted to listen. And so they allowed all these missteps to take place, and now they're trying to undo it. Well, you know what? Shut up. Because right now, he's a personal landowner. Now, you can take development rights away, so what? He still owns his land. And in America, if you want to sell your land to somebody and they want to take a risk and put you in as a partner on something, that can be done. So don't come in here with anything other than we screwed up in the beginning, because we knew that that development could not move forward the way it was presented to us. It did not have any reality to it. I've said this time and time again on this floor, but right now we got to look out for our city. We cannot continue to have all this abandoned property sitting there with somebody who does not have any money to develop it, and we cannot continue to try to be in the middle of a cleanup of a mess that somebody else made. That's not fair to our constituents, because it could have been done different in the very beginning. So I'm not going to play that game on this floor. So anytime there's development that's going to happen and there's somebody that's bona fide who can get it done, I'm going to vote for it, because we need it. Nobody here took the time to go after the committee hearing, before the committee hearing, ask additional questions. It's Johnny too late today. because there's nothing else to talk about. This guy has gone across this country and developed this same system, not once, not twice, not just 3 times, and also did it outside this country. This doctor and his development group is extremely competent, and they have their own money for this development. And if you don't want to ever have this city on a solid ground, and you just want to continue to be always negative and running people away, I'm afraid to know what the new census numbers are going to be, because we don't operate in a positive mode that says we really care about this city. We want this city to improve. We want to see developers come in and spend their money. And I don't care what your name is now. All I care is that it's done right and it meets all approvals that are required. And I guarantee you, nobody here knows even the beginning of what is required to open a medical facility. You don't know that. And so ask 99,000 questions, try to hold it up again. That's what happened the last time, because the city was so busy cleaning up the mess they made. We could have the hospital under construction by now, from when this gentleman first started trying to do this project. It is sinful what goes on here when it comes to development. But I tell you one thing, people are getting tired of it. So everybody who wants to be on that boat and row on it, I guarantee you, you're going to be rowing to nowhere if you want to stay in politics, because this town is tired. People have too much at stake. People who have lived in their homes for years, they want more. They want better. And we have got to recognize that. We have got to recognize it. So I'm going to leave you with this. I do know how to start a healthcare center. It took us 12 years. Me and my father in Tampa opened the first neighborhood health clinic. And you have to have state and federal certifications. You better not try to build one without it. Thank you.
Thank you. Alderman from the 4th.
Thank you, Mr. President and members of the board. I don't understand and don't know why we're being denied medical attention on the north side. You took away Homer Phillips Hospital with Conway. The sign said the wrong way, the long way is the wrong way, Conway. Then we elected Vince Shamo based on the fact that he said that he was going to reopen that hospital. I walked to Jefferson City, probably why I'm in the condition I'm in now. Me and Bosley's dad walked to Jefferson City with over 20,000 signatures when Walking Joe Teasdale was the governor. We walked to Jefferson City. When we got there, Teasdale had left. He had invited us up and then he left. But this is wrong. And Tammika, I recommend you on what you're doing. I commend you on what you're doing. I lost an eye on that very site fighting down in the Prohibiting project. So, you know, I wish the hospital was there then. Probably would have saved my eye. But I want my name added to this bill.
Madam Clerk.
And I think this is a great deal, and I want my colleagues from North and South to think about it, that we need to have health care on the north side. Somebody's talking over me, Mr. President.
Let's have some order. Please proceed, Alderman.
Next time, Tracy, turn it up on them. But all of us can't go to Bourne's Jewish, and all of us cannot afford Bourne's Jewish. And that site down there is a contaminated site. It's ugly, and it'll complement the NGA, which I didn't vote for. Thank you.
Thank you. Alderwoman from the 14th.
I'd like to commend the alderwoman from the 5th on her foresight in proceeding this and her persistence. I think that this will prove in the long run with the activity that will excuse me, that's planned for the north side, that I think it will be a well-used and well-planned facility for the north side, not only for the residents there now, but the ones that will be coming as soon as the newer developments come in. So I appreciate her foresight, and I would like to be added to that bill also.
All right, thank you. Alderwoman from the 27th.
Thank you, Mr. President. I guess where I'm coming from in support of this, if you haven't been a part of it or haven't been engulfed into that area, you can't relate to what the Alderwoman from the 5th is fighting for. And so I hear a lot of people say, it's because of black people, it's because it's just we being mistreated. Well, we have been mistreated. But when you had a family member that got murdered down there, and he hadn't died, he got shot, and it wasn't a hospital close for him to get to, and by the time he got there, he had died. That's why I would support this bill. Because when it hits your families, and it hits people that you grew up with, and as Sam Moore said, people you fought with, and you know that if they were closer, it was something there closer to serve them, they might be here today. So it's not about black or white, it's about people's lives. And people need to be real clear. It's not a color thing to me, it's about people that we're fighting for. And people need to be real clear. It's not just black people that live down there. It's people that live down there. People's lives are important to us. And so I think what she's fighting for is the survival of the people down there. And we need to quit putting stigmas on people. You know, we just need to say we're fighting for the survival of those people that have little to work with, and they need all the help they can get to keep them going in their community every day. Thank you.
Any further discussion? Alderman from the 21st.
Hey, thank you, Mr. President. I just rise to applaud the efforts and the work of our colleague from the 5th Ward. The development at this site is historic and it's most definitely needed. When you look at all the wards in North St. Louis and some wards in South St. Louis, we have a lack of jobs, lack of opportunities, and lack of access. And with this urgent care facility, this hospital, this medical facility, what it does is addresses each and every one of those problems, social problems and economical problems. And this is probably one of the first times that SLDC has finally gotten it right. This is what tax abatement is supposed to be used for. This is what tax subsidies are supposed to be used for, the development of disenfranchised and marginalized communities. And I cannot think of anyone that fits that characterization than the 5th Ward in North St. Louis. So I commend you, Alderwoman Hubbard, and I am proud to support this bill, and I will be voting yes. And I would encourage every one of my colleagues here, North and South, white and black, to support this bill too, because if you don't, you're going to be sending the wrong message to North St. Louis. You're going to be sending the wrong message to low-income people that they don't deserve access to health care. And this is exactly what this board bill does. Thank you, Alderwoman Hubbard.
All right. Alderman from the 17th.
Yes, Mr. President. This bill came to my committee, and I thought I'd speak to it, given that it's somewhat become a little controversial. I was approached about having a hearing for the bill. I try to provide hearing for all bills, regardless if I'm in favor of them or not. I wasn't terribly familiar with the mechanics of this until we actually had the hearing, and I had to refresh my memory, and we've learned quite a bit during that hearing. Prior to the hearing, some of the issues that were discussed earlier today came up. What about the legality of the doing an agreement like this with McKee if we're in litigation with them? I actually went out and got a letter of opinion on that issue from the city councilor. Initially, the city councilor had a problem with the issue, provided an opinion to that effect. We shared that opinion with the council for this project. There was some discussion, some emails back and forth. and it was determined by SLDC that there was a workaround for that issue. So that's issue number one that came up. The second issue that came up during the committee was that this is an area-wide TIF that would support the first phase of the project. The first phase of the project, there's two phases. The first phase was the smaller of the two, and that phase was very infrastructure heavy. In other words, a high percentage of the total development costs went to infrastructure. So there wasn't a whole lot of new economic activity from that. And it was pretty clear in the discussion in committee that the concern that SLDC and others had was that if the second phase of the hospital was not completed and we pledged the area-wide TIF to the completion of the first phase and the second one didn't get done, we could end up creating almost a black zone for the 1,500 acres of the area-wide, because we would have a large TIF node out there, and the incremental revenue from the entire 1,500 acres would have to support that. However, if the second phase did get built, the economics on the project turned around dramatically. It was rated as a 5-star project, which is the highest that our model developed down here. That is higher than, it's as high as you can get. Projects that received stars far less than that in other parts of the city received our support down here. And so I was concerned about that in committee. I think several of the other committee members were. There was frustration by some members of the Black Caucus that said that SLDC was not providing or paying enough attention to them. They, despite my objection, voted it out of committee. But it achieved the goal of having a discussion with SLDC. SLDC negotiated with the developer. And what they ended up doing was they put a clause in it, which was passed out, I believe, last week, which in essence caps the revenue from the area-wide TIF if the second phase does not get done. So in other words, the area-wide TIF will not, the revenue stream from that will be cut off unless the second phase gets done. So if the second phase gets done, now all of a sudden we have a 5-star project. And so that was kind of the contingency that was set up. I was included in the emails back and forth. I don't know, I presume other HUD's committee members were as well. But SLDC felt that was a reasonable compromise. This TIF, just so everybody understands, has been extremely delayed. So we're 13 years into it, so there's only 10 years left on the TIF, so it's a far shorter TIF than what it would be if we initiated a new one. SLDC at one point had offered to do a brand new TIF that would be site specific, that would run for 23 years. And they also offered to do the bottom half of the TIF, which is something that's very rarely done. It was the developer that decided that this would probably be the better alternative, and frankly, it's probably a little cheaper than what the SLDC was, cheaper from the city's perspective than what SLDC was offering. So when I've learned of that compromise, I thought it was reasonable, and I agreed to support it. I want to say something else, though, too, is, and I'm doing this, political danger here. I'm flirting with death, trying to go ahead, political death, trying to defend Paul McKee. I am not trying to defend Paul McKee. I don't know a whole lot about the intricacies of his work up there over the years, but I would like to kind of share some of my personal experiences. I actually knew Paul McKee first when he was chairman. Well, I guess I might have known him a little bit before that, but I got to know him quite well when he was chairman of BJC. He used to be chairman of Christian Hospital, and then when Christian Hospital was merged into what was at the time Barnes Jewish, it became BJC, and each of the heads of each of the 3 hospitals had a 5-year period where they became chairman. So Paul McKee used to be chairman of BJC, and that's where I developed a relationship with him and kind of developed some understanding. I had very little interaction with him with all of the things he has done in North St. Louis prior to my time becoming chairman of HUD's. After I became chairman of HUD's, I've had some interaction with him several years ago. I don't know a whole lot about, what's going on in the neighborhoods up there or what's important, to the Alderwoman of the 5th. But I do want to say that when you're doing development, it is very easy to be critical and easy to say, oh, don't work with that developer when you're in an area that is really in pretty good shape. But when you represent an area that is distressed, and now much of the 17th Ward is not distressed, but when I was first elected, much of it was distressed. And nowadays, people walk through the intersection of Euclid and West Pine, and they act like it's a showcase, and, oh my gosh, we're abusing all the incentives and everything. Let me just say that when I was first elected, the Forest Park Hotel was vacant. There was a 16-story building over there that was referred to as the trash can building, directly across the street from where Whole Foods is today. It was vacant, and homeless people were in it, and it was 16 stories of poured concrete, and we had to tear it down. Where Whole Foods was a largely vacant office building with a big surface parking lot. The Chase Hotel was vacant for a period of time. Now that has all been done, and as you go through that, it's not smooth. There was a period of time when they tore down the office building that was there where Whole Foods actually is today. They started on the project, dug a big hole, and it was the West End Lake for a couple years. And we had to live through that. And if somebody would have called me up, the number of complaints I used to get about the trash can building, I would get a complaint a day about that. And if somebody would have said, hey, well, would you do a deal with Joseph Stalin to get that building done? I would have done it. And if they said, would you do a deal with Adolf Hitler? Well, that's not probably a very good example, but to fix the lake, to fix the lake at the corner of Euclid and West Pine, when it was a lake for 2 years, I would have done almost anything to get that done. People talk about Botanical Heights. I mean, Botanical Heights, when we used to control block grant money as aldermen, I'd take my block grant money and I would just put it in a big pile and say, anybody wanting to build in Botanical Heights, here's a big pile of money. Just fix one house over there. I couldn't give enough money away to get one house done. We went through a period over there where they were burning down the houses so badly, I would have done anything, and did. I mean, it was painful to go ahead. Everybody thinks, oh yeah, just go ahead and do. We leveled 6 blocks over there, 6 square blocks of the city, and started from scratch. Forest Park Southeast, which is one of the strongest neighborhoods on the move today. We had a period of time where Washington University, I shouldn't be using names like this, but they owned a bunch of houses and they kept them boarded up for 10, 15 years before, and they're just now finally getting around to it. I'll tell you a situation right now. Corner of Kings Highway in Oakland. Can you picture that? One of the most prominent corners in the city, just a couple blocks south. There's a series of vacant buildings up there, and all the neighbors around those buildings, there is a very prominent company in town that owns those, and they've been trying to assemble a site up there, and the whole neighborhood is just furious with them. And I'm like in the middle of it, and if I could solve that problem today, I'd do it, and I'd do it with somebody I wouldn't like working with. And I guess what I'm trying to say is one of the most difficult things in development is site assemblage and kind of making that transition. And I kind of call it the caterpillar before the butterfly. You will go through a period of time where things get really ugly and everybody's complaining about it, and then hopefully, if you're lucky, the butterfly will emerge from the cocoon and you'll have a beautiful thing. And for me to sit down in a neighborhood that's been largely developed and supported by the Black Caucus for, almost everyone in the Black Caucus has given me support for the last 30 years for projects to help me fix the lake in the Central West End, to tear down the 14 or 16 story trash can building, to redo Botanical Heights and Forest Park Southeast. And all those times, they never questioned my judgment over which developer I was working with. Who am I to sit down in my neighborhood and say, oh, your judgment isn't as good as my judgment was, and so I'm going to vote against this project? I just think that that is so hypocritical and condescending that, I just think it's just a terrible way for us to conduct business down here. And I just wanted to stand up and say I support this, and I trust the judgment of the Alderwoman from the 6th that she is listening to her constituents and is acting in their best interest. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman. Alderman from the 22nd.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of the board. I appreciate the Alderman from the 17th. He said half the things that I kind of wanted to allude to. But process is everything. And I'm going to ask if the Alderwoman from the 8th Ward would yield.
Alderwoman from the 8th will yield the questions. Alderman from the 22nd.
Sure.
Alderman from the 22nd, please
Sure.
proceed.
Thank you, Alderwoman. Were you present last Friday during the perfection phase?
Yes, I was.
Okay, and did you say aye on voting this out of perfection?
I was quiet. No, I did not.
Okay.
But I did not register one way or the other.
Okay. Do you think that that would have been an opportunity if you had any issue or questions or concerns about the bill to maybe raise it during that debate period?
I think that there are a number of times that are good times to have a debate on a bill. I think that perfection is one of them, and I think that a third read and passage time is also an ample time to have a debate.
Okay, but would you agree that if we bring and raise concerns during perfection, if we can't respond and it's a really great question, that it gives us a chance, if it passes, to talk more about it during third reading?
Sure, that's a valid point, but there are questions that come up in the intervening week that now we're discussing.
Sure, thank you, and not to pick on the Alderman, because I want to ask the same questions of the Alderman from the 6th. It seems like there's a conspiracy about Paul McKee, the boogeyman. If a project's associated with the name Paul McKee in any way whatsoever, the city of St. Louis should automatically shut it down. Notwithstanding the fact that the opportunity is great. Some people have a problem with the fact that the bill came out of committee. The bill came out of committee, as the Alderman from the 17th said, over his objection. But it was an opportunity to, again, make, require, insist that SLDC work with the development team to make this project a more viable project and compromise. I don't apologize to anybody for making sure that that bill came out of committee, because understand this hospital is bigger than Paul McKee. This hospital is going to be in a neighborhood in which the African American Caucus Foundation commissioned a health disparity report several years ago that said in that zip code, the health disparities are similar to a third world country. That's a fact. And this is about saving lives of people, more specifically black people, because the majority of the people that live in that neighborhood are black people, although I'm sure the healthcare facility is open to all people. I think it's a shame that in print media that they will print false stories and fake narratives about this project not being a good project, and it's somehow that we as legislators are irresponsible to support a project because Paul McKee name is associated with it. Anybody but Paul McKee is what it sounds like. Anybody but Paul McKee. That's a shame, because we cannot get out of this myopic thought about who really works in the best interest of our city. It has to be certain select groups of people. Some people are blacklisted to do development in the city of St. Louis. And the alderman from the 17th is right. There are times when it shouldn't matter who it is if it's going to make a significant impact and a difference in our community. Social media, people have all these great opinions, right? Most of them haven't done, would be nice, anything for the city of St. Louis. But they have all these great opinions and they want to target people. And the print media, shame on them, targeting black leadership, because that's all they've done since this passed out of committee. Trying to assert an assumption that the only reason black leadership supports this project is because they got a financial reward years ago. That's insulting. Shame on them. This has to do with elevating the quality of life of African American people in the city of St. Louis. There shouldn't be one alderman down here that can consciously, with a good conscience, not vote for this bill. I don't care how many emails you got from your constituents. They don't live in the 5th Ward. I don't live in the 5th Ward. But for over a decade, I have supported initiatives in the 5th Ward because it was the right thing to do. The alderman from the 3rd Ward and I disagreed with the alderman from the 5th Ward within the past 12 months about a development in her ward, but we voted for it and we supported that bill because we thought it was in the best interest of the city of St. Louis. And guess what? Paul McKee's name was associated with that bill. So we have demonstrated, the alderman from the 3rd Ward and myself, that we can still find common ground and support the alderman from the 5th Ward, even though we disagree with her, for the greater good of the city of St. Louis. I'm calling out everybody that wants to vote no and is on record for voting no for this bill, because it's wrong if you do. This is about black people in the city of St. Louis, and this is about standing up for what's right in spite of all the hoopla and misinformation that has been put out there. Thank you, Mr. President.
All right, thank you. Any further discussion? Alderman from the 25th.
Thank you, Mr. President. You know, I haven't come to a clear decision as to whether or not I'm voting yes or no on this particular piece of legislation. I do want to inquire of the alderman from the 17th Ward if he would.
Alderman from the 17th, will you yield the questions to the alderman from the 25th? Alderman from the 25th, please proceed.
First, Alderman, I'd like to afford you the opportunity to clear the air that you would not, in fact, want to work with anyone who's committed genocide to redevelop the city. I imagine that is.
That was an exaggeration. Thank you. Thank you. Setting.
Yeah. So second to that, yeah. So Hitler was not the only person that committed genocide. Stalin also did. But I'm curious about the TIF note. You were talking about that during your oration. And that's really where I've really had struggles with this particular piece of legislation. You know, we passed an area TIF, and I want to be clear. You know, I support a healthcare facility in North St. Louis, very much so. I know it's completely over-needed, and it's a area in particular in the 5th Ward, the 4th Ward, the 3rd Ward, the 21st Ward. The 27th Ward, the 22nd Ward are all in desperate need of health care and options and facilities available to those wards. We're fortunate in Southeast City to still have one hospital left. It's not the most high quality hospital in the region, but it's at least it has an emergency room and plenty of beds and a rehab facility as well. So I want to rise and say that I'm very supportive of having a healthcare facility in North St. Louis, whether that's an urgent care, an ambulatory care center, rehab center, what have you. I think that I would be hard pressed to name any of our colleagues that would be against that. But from the TIF note perspective, this is an area TIF, correct? It's still an area TIF.
Yes, that is correct.
And have the
as I understand it, I've kind of been copied on emails back and forth, and we haven't done a deep dive on any of them, but yes, that's as I understand it.
And I recall when I first got elected 10 years ago now, this was just a conversation that the TIF part of the conversation had just come before the Board of Aldermen at that point in time. Have the boundaries of the TIF, to your knowledge, changed since we initially passed that legislation?
I was not chairman of HUD at that time. So.
I believe, and don't quote me on
Hold
this.
on a second. Hold on a second.
Yeah,
Hold on a second.
Mr. President,
Would you
may
like
I
to-
inquire of the Alderwoman from the 5th Ward, please?
Alderman from the 5th, will you yield the question to the Alderman from the 25th?
Yes.
Alderman from the 25th, please proceed.
Yes, I believe when I first got elected in December of 2011, I believe shortly after that, or maybe a few months preceding that, I believe they added the Bottle District into the TIF footprint. And since that time, I don't believe the boundaries have changed at all.
Okay, thank you, Alderwoman. And I'm not sure if you have this information or if, the Alderman from the 17th Ward as the chairman of HUDs has the information. But do you know roughly how much money has been collected from the area TIF?
So in the special allocation fund currently, and this came out of committee, it was roughly like, I think, 862,000 left in there. They had recently did a payout to the grocery store that we just did during the, like last year, the Greenleaf Market.
Mm-hmm. With the gas station as well.
Yes,
And the payout for that particular project was roughly like 1.6,
I believe so.
$1.8 million, somewhere around there. And it was all for and I want to be clear because I'm not anti-TIF, particularly for North St. Louis and Southeast City. I want to be very clear because there seems to be some confusion with SLDC on a very regular basis. Incentives are supposed to be used in North St. Louis and Southeast City. I don't think that anyone has any issues with incentives, whether they're tax and abatements or TIFs or community improvement districts for areas of North St. Louis and Southeast City. So I want to be very clear that I'm not anti-TIF. I am an advocate for responsible development within our city. So, but along that line, I am curious because it is an area TIF, so it's a little bit different than many of the other TIFs that we see in the Central Corridor in particular, where it's one site, one project, there's revenue that's coming from that particular parcel or group of parcels that are project related that generate revenue. This is an entire area that takes revenue in incremental amounts and then basically through bonds and whatnot then issues funds for infrastructure, right? So the TIF, as I recall, is only for infrastructure, right? So within the TIF, as I recall it, I mean, it's a pretty significant size. It's your ward, it's portions of the...
Yes, it's like 3 or 4 redevelopment areas. I think it's like RPA, it's ABCD, it's very vast, and that was some of our concerns initially when we were having so much resistance with this project because the soccer stadium fits in this same footprint, and we were wondering were they going to try to use those monies in a special allocation fund for the stadium in lieu of the hospital, and so those were some of the conversations that came out. But yes, to your question, it is a very broad area.
So, but the revenue that's being collected for the special allocation fund, is that per TIF area, or is that for the entire TIF district?
I would like to say it's for the entire district, but don't quote me on that. I think that's a question that would be better posed to the comptroller's office.
Yeah, my understanding is that it's for the entire TIF district and it's not for the separate geographies within it.
That's correct.
So there are, as you're aware, a lot of other projects that are planned to take place within that TIF district, which would hopefully generate more revenue. My concern is that we're using this for infrastructure for a particular developer versus the entire geographic area right now. As you mentioned, there's roughly been $2.4 million collected for the TIF allocation at this point. 1.6, 1.8 million of that went to the gas station, grocery store, right off the interstate. So that was one project that took 70 20% roughly of the funds that were available from the
Okay,
allocation
and
fund?
I
I mean, do you get where I'm kind of going?
I understand, but I think it's probably some clarification is probably needed if you, and I don't want to speak due to something that went on before I was here, but I believe that that whole TIF plan, just everything with the Dow Tech, and all total, I think it's roughly like it's a $390 million TIF that's there, and it was specifically for this area that was so blighted and had experienced all these years of disinvestment. And you know, when you say TIF, people think it's just a developer lining his pockets, but it's monies for infrastructure that really the city should have done. You know, like on this hospital project, a lot of those dollars are going toward roads and stuff. Prodigo has sat there for 60 years, like all these years underdeveloped. And so if we build a hospital and we have NGA coming across the street, first of all, when we lobbied to get NGA, we had to make sure we weren't leaving them on an island by themselves. That was a very competitive process, and we were able to land that. And so it's incumbent upon the city to really make sure that we handle those infrastructure issues. But here we have a developer that's really doing the work of the city to make sure that our roads and stuff are right so that we can operate and move forward.
So, and I appreciate that, and I understand that these are only for infrastructure uses. My concern is that, you know, we're talking about a very large geographic area, and that infrastructure investment to date, at least, has only taken place in very small, very specific areas of the TIF district.
Right, because that's the lack of investment in the area. I mean, it's hard. We had to work years just to get a grocery store because the city is not toying up these big incentive packages for North St. Louis like they do in other places in the city. People don't want to come to North St. Louis. I mean, we have a Family Dollar on every corner. We've been working years trying to get like a Target or an Anchor store, or like my colleague from the first said, a hardware store. It's like people don't want to spend their money because as a city, we haven't been really teeing it up for them to do it. And so this area is blighted. I'm pretty sure if someone else wanted to come in and have access to that TIF to make a deal work, then we are all about growth and development in that footprint and in that area. So I don't think the person who has the redevelopment rights would be against that. But I know I would definitely be against a soccer stadium recouping money for this TIF when they have $1 gazillion to move forward, opposed to them taking away from a hospital.
So, and actually that was kind of the second part of my questions that I wanted to ask you was, I've heard there's a lot of terms being thrown around that are not interchangeable terms, but I've heard the term hospital, I've heard the term urgent care, I've heard, you know, colleagues referencing, you know, gunshots, which are generally ambulatory and trauma care. You know, is this facility going to be a hospital, or is it going to be an urgent care facility?
The HealthWorks Hospital project is a 3-bedroom hospital, expandable up to 103,000 square feet, with a 24-hour emergency room and associated public infrastructure improvements.
So, and is the emergency room, because the alderman from the 17th ward, that's part of the questions that I was going to ask him, had mentioned that this was going to be in 2 different phases. So is the emergency room part of the first phase?
Yes,
or is
it is.
Part of the second phase?
Yeah, it's a part of the first phase, and on the second phase, we'll have a healthcare village, and that's where Ponce University, who's currently operating downtown, it's a health sciences university. They'll move their university up to the footprint, and then the second phase will include a lot of other things. We're trying to create a medical corridor, and there's a big elaborate plan which will lay all of this out. I have some of the information here. A lot of it came out in committee, but if you would definitely like more information on how this is going to work, I could give it to you.
And are you familiar, so is the structure of the hospital, is it going to be a nonprofit hospital, or is it going to be a for-profit hospital?
It has and this is the whole financing package of it. So there's a non-for-profit entity that has ownership. There are other private partners, and so they were very strategic in how they packaged it together for tax purposes and everything else. And so they could, like, that stuff came out in committee. I don't really have that part of it roaming around in my head because I definitely just want to get this done. But everybody in committee heard how it was going to be packaged together. SLDC is comfortable with it, and that's how we got here today, because they negotiated and they feel that it's a viable project.
Thank you, Alderwoman. May I inquire of the Alderman from the 17th Ward again?
Alderman from the 17th will yield the question to the Alderman from the 25th.
Sure.
Alderman from the 25th, please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Alderman. I am curious, during committee, just getting into the particulars of the structure of the deal, I'm curious because part of that tax increment financing is taking the incremental difference between where things are from a tax-based perspective right now and where they are projected to be or what revenue is collected on top of what's currently collected. So, I mean, there's a big difference if you're running a nonprofit institution, because we have many of those in your ward, actually,
Sure.
St. Louis University, SSM Healthcare with the Cardinal Glennon and BJC Hospital. We end up not having property taxes from those particular entities, which we still provide services to. In some cases, we've done informal memorandums of understanding for trash services for streets, and they've certainly helped with building out infrastructure.
No, it's a valid question.
So
I see where you're going, and it's a valid question.
Yeah, did we have that conversation at all during committee, whether or not this is going to be a for-profit entity that owns the land and pays taxes, or is it planned to be a nonprofit where this land is not on the tax rolls at all?
No, we did not, but, and forgive me, I guess, for not getting that deep in the weeds during committee. I think it's a good thought, but we were relied on the analysis that was done by John Ferry. So he, as I think you're aware, he goes through and we view income streams from real estate, from all tax sources, real estate, earnings tax, and so forth. So we reviewed the capital stack to see where it's coming from. The capital stack, I think, for the phase one was heavy on TIF. I think it was 20 to 25 million, 6 of which was TIF. And then on phase two, the TIF expanded a little above 8, but the project got up to 70 or 80 million. I think it was, TIF ended up being only about 10 or 12% of the entire development cost, which all the revenue from the city standpoint was on the phase two portion of it. And I guess my theory in all this is that it's not an ideal way to fund TIF, but I thought SLDC had done a fairly good job of striking a compromise and capping our exposure to the area wide, because that was the real concern, that we'd create a blackout zone, that we'd end up with a few $1 million worth of TIF notes that didn't get paid off. But the fact that they made phase two contingent on, in other words, the area wide doesn't really kick in if phase two doesn't happen. So that revenue stream is truncated. So the only way that they get access to it is that they have to get funding and financing for the second phase, and it has to get built.
And I'm not sure if this is a question for you or the fifth
and
ward,
going back,
but
she may have.
So what is the second?
Here, maybe you can whisper in my ear, and we can save the. So portions of it are for-profit, non-profit, and I guess SLDC was aware of which is which, and certainly would have taken consideration of that in developing the 5-star that it got for its model. So
okay, that certainly helps me to understand the project a little bit more. I mean, it's better for me to have a understanding that the property is going to also contribute to the area TIF, not only from existential point of view by being able to provide healthcare services to a very underserved community, but also from a financial perspective of the city, because we're all fiduciary obligated to protect the fiduciary responsibilities of the city. I just want to make sure that we're also making sure that that's going to be a responsible development as well. And it sounds as though SLDC is taking some of the appropriate steps to ensure that we're not going to end up creating bonds or issuing TIF notes for a project that may not materialize. Right.
That was my sense, and that's why I voted against it in committee, and I was hoping to have that compromise worked out before it got to the full floor, but,
So
I think...
I guess to be clear, has that been worked out at this point?
I guess since I'm standing here, unless you want to recommend... there was an amendment that I believe that was placed on everyone's desk last week, and again, I am not an attorney, but that's...
So last week, if I recall, we did this by voice vote. We didn't actually have any discussion on it. So was the amendment adopted in committee then? Or
No,
was
no, it was adopted on the floor last week.
We did a voice vote to adopt the amendment last week.
We voted to adopt the amendment unanimously last week.
Right, okay. Sorry, I was a little under the weather while I was sitting in this
That's
chamber
okay.
last week.
That's all right.
I've been on antibiotics for the last 2 weeks, so I'm feeling much better now. Okay, so this has been adopted, and we're operating with the same understanding with regards to SLDC's position and their obligation with regard to the TIF and the issuance of funds.
That is my understanding.
Okay.
I've gotten emails from the director of SLDC acknowledging that they're okay with that as amended.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I have no further questions, Mr. President. Thank
All
you.
right, thank you. Alderman from the 12th? Alderman from 12th?
Never mind, Mr. President. I don't see nobody else standing up. I was going to call for the question at this point.
Yeah, I think we're good. Alderman from the 8th?
Say if I would oppose your call for a question, but so thank you. I have just a couple of more questions. Actually, the first one for the alderman from the 17th, if I could inquire of the alderman from the 17th.
Alderman from the 17th, will you yield the question to the Alderman from the 8th?
Sure.
Alderman from the 8th, please proceed.
Thank you. So just getting a little bit confused as to the parcel that we're talking about here. So the overall TIF that was initially authorized that we're now, you said we're 13 years into, was the massive from grand to 70 to 64 space, correct?
I believe that was it's 1,500 acres is
Okay.
what they referred to as
that
the
whole
committee.
chunk. So we're talking phase 1, we are talking about specifically this site, and phase 2 would then include the entire area of the TIF?
No, Alderwoman, so we frequently do kind of site-specific TIFs where all the incremental revenue is tied specifically to the site.
Okay.
There is, I think, and we have not done many area-wide TIFs in St. Louis. I actually believe that in a number of our distressed neighborhoods, they are a really powerful tool, but we have not done those. This, however, is an area-wide TIF. And what that does is it creates the ability to collect incremental revenue from the entire area and then redirect that to infrastructure specific projects. So this is a parcel, one parcel that's kind of a subset of the 1,500 acres.
Okay.
We're using incremental revenue from the entire 1,500 acres to support this project, but only if the second phase gets done.
Okay, that's helpful. So the potential sort of black site, if they would not gone forward with this second phase that you were discussing, there is still, it's a massive part of the city that we're talking about, that any sort of TIF revenue would go to this specific project, but not towards any other project
I guess
that is happening in that area.
Some of this stuff, it's almost like math where we're kind of discussing something at one level here and we're kind of assuming that 3 calculations are going to work over here.
Sure.
In order to get the second phase, built, this is maybe a simplistic way of looking at it, but in order to get the second phase built, they're going to have to go out and find somebody, either they're going to have to put their own money in or find somebody else who believes enough in the project that they're going to stick a whole bunch of money into this thing.
Right.
And you're not going to get an $80 million building,
Sure.
It's going to be very, very difficult to get
Sure.
that. If you get $80 million invested up there and you get a major building and you get infrastructure around it and everything, I guess the whole thing could go, go broke and they'd be emptied, in the next year. But, as far as the standard of risk going, and you're talking about our exposure by structuring this way is reduced so dramatically that, I just think it's kind of a minor risk from our standpoint, and that's my opinion, and I think that's probably their opinion over at SLDC. If the thing doesn't get built, we don't have to worry about the incremental revenue going to the project. If it does get built, to give you a sense, on an $80 million project, you're going to get half of that will be salaries. So that's $40 million at 1.5% with earnings and payroll tax. So you'll get $600,000 in incremental taxes just from the salaries that are going to be there. Okay. And then you got $1 million in the fund already. So now you're at 1.6 million. You would have to have a incredibly disastrous or irresponsible lender for that thing to go bankrupt in the first year. I mean, it just...
So, well, and that I understand. I guess what I'm trying to wrap my head around at the moment is if the entirety of this geographic area that we are talking about for the area-wide TIF is going to be generating revenue into this smaller HealthWorks site, then if there are development projects that need to happen in the rest of that TIF area, then they don't reap the TIF benefit that the HealthWorks site would.
It's certainly, there's an element of risk on that. Certainly that's a concern.
Okay, I'm just trying to sort of hash that out. Okay.
Yeah, I think that's probably a valid concern.
Okay. Thank you. That's all the questions I had. If the Alderman from the 5th would yield for questions.
Alderman from the 5th, will yield the questions to Alderman from the 8th.
Yes.
Alderman from the 8th, please proceed.
Thank you so much. I'm sorry. Just a couple more questions. I know the Alderman from the 6th asked about Medicaid, and that's a great answer there. What about regardless of insurance? Another issue that we have at some of these is that the patients get turned away for either not having insurance or not having a correct insurance. Is there a way to get a quick answer from them as far as whether they will be accepting patients regardless of insurance status?
I can't answer that, but definitely you are open to calling them and finding out that information. And once again, I'll say this, I'll keep saying this. It's almost as if you're standing up here picking my brain to see if I got the best interest of my constituents at heart. We look alike. I love them deep. You could never advocate for Black and brown people more than I could, and I've asked a lot of these hard questions. So I'm open to the questions, but you're almost making me take offense because you keep popping up asking about things that would be in the best interest of my constituents, people who I've been around all my life in a community. My family has been there 5 generations. I've walked across dead bodies to go to school to be bussed out of my neighborhood. So where I get your concerns, I'm not sure if you're deeply concerned or if you're simply digging at the project. And I just, I hope that in going forward down here, we can really just get to the business of it. You had every opportunity to pose these questions. At the hearing, I'm not a hospital expert, nor do I pretend to be. I can't tell you how hospitals are structured or how they do their billing. That's not my role. My role here is to advocate on behalf of the constituents of the 5th Ward and get the bill through committee and overturn 60 years of disinvestment. That's it.
I understand. So Alderwoman, I am not trying to undermine your desire to serve your community in any way. I would never insinuate that. And I would hope that you would understand that I have the best interests of the people at heart as well. One final question, will they be taking gunshot victims as a Trauma 1 center is my last question.
I don't know. I can't tell you that.
Okay.
But how we have a lot of gunshots going on, so I don't know too many ERs that don't take gunshot victims, so.
Right.
Okay.
A level 1 is, and the city allocates different hospitals on a rotating basis to be the level 1 trauma centers. So sometimes they get taken to Barnes, sometimes they get taken to SLU, depending on where the agreements are in the city. And so they're freestanding hospitals that take heart attacks, things like that, but not gunshot victims.
Okay.
So
thank you for your concern. At this time, I'll fail to you, Mr. President.
Okay. That's all the questions I have. Thank you.
All right. Alderman from the 23rd.
To make this go any longer, but I was getting a little bit upset with those questions. Is the assumption that people in that area don't have insurance? Do we ask these questions of people in my neighborhood? Oh, should we build 2 urgent cares in my neighborhood? Should we have checked? Are they going to take people? No, nobody asked one question. Why are we asking this question? It's ridiculous and it's racist, in my opinion. I will add that's my opinion, but I can tell she's getting offended because I'm getting offended.
All right, thank you, Alderman.
Ridiculous.
Thank you, Alderman. Alderman from the 22nd.
Mr. President, I just want to go on record of how offended I am from the Alderman from the 8th Ward. This is ridiculous. Now, my expectation is she is setting a precedence that every time a TIF bill comes before us, that she will dig into the weeds, because that's what she's doing here. You're asking about the operations of a facility, and I mean, she's asked for almost everything but their tax records, okay? That is insulting. It is extremely insulting, and she needs to stop it. But my expectation will be that when there's a TIF bill, everybody want to dig into the weeds of this. When there's a TIF bill presented here, my expectation is that you will dig all into the weeds of those bills too, because this has never happened before. This has never happened before. This is an attack on this bill. I don't feel that there are genuine questions and concerns, because if you really had them, you should have had them last week with no, and I'm not saying you don't have a right to ask on third reading. But now people are getting text messages and emails about asking certain questions that should have been asked some time ago. This bill was not on fast track. This was an open and transparent process. And I am insulted. Shame.
Alderman from the 25th.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just want to point out the idiosyncrasy of the alderman from the 23rd Ward taking exception to this process. I would like to note that if he ever brought forth a tax abatement or TIF bill for an urgent care in the 23rd Ward, I would certainly be questioning whether or not we should be doing that. So, I understand that, there's a lot of passion around this particular issue. I believe when I stood up, earlier, I am very much supportive of providing quality healthcare services in North St. Louis. I am very much supportive of ensuring that, people who, have ambulatory care needs or emergency care needs, have access to those resources. We struggle with that, in parts of South St. Louis as well. We also, most of North St. Louis, if not all of it, I mean, I know the alderwoman from the 1st Ward mentioned that her ward's really close to Barnes, but it's right down Kings Highway, but there's other parts of the 1st Ward, there's other parts of the 22nd Ward that while they might be close to a major street or highway, it's still moments and minutes more that could be, life-saving minutes in an urgent care or an ambulatory care or an emergency setting. So, I hope that we can all appreciate that. I think every single person down at this Board of Aldermen respects that and respects that we want to have healthcare services across the entire city. Last night I was reading tweets from a woman who was posting maps of the city of St. Louis, and all the maps, look very much the same in terms of homicide rates, aggravated assaults, child homelessness, poverty rates, access to health care. It's North St. Louis and Southeast City that, constantly show in bright, vivid colors on these maps, with regards to, where we need to be investing our time, our resources, and our energy. So I am very supportive of making sure that we have healthcare options available in North St. Louis. I do want to make sure that as the city, as a fiscal agent of the city, and as someone who has been through this process for the last 10 years now, and was here when we first passed the initial TIF, that we are using those TIF revenues responsibly and making sure that, to the effect that this urgent care does get built, that it does have the emergency room portion associated with it, that it is going to be certified so that we do have quality health care in those neighborhoods in North St. Louis. I think that those are important questions to ask. I don't think that we should be shaming anyone for asking those questions. I think the Alderwoman from the 5th Ward made an excellent point that we are not hospital experts down here. I fail to recognize anyone down here who has actually managed a hospital, or I know the Alderwoman from the 2nd Ward does home health care, but aside from that, I don't think anyone down here has been CEO or manager within the hospitals. So we're all working off of basic knowledge here. So I want to thank the Alderwoman for her work serving her community in the 5th Ward, and certainly this is something that we all know North St. Louis needs. You know, whether it was Homer G. Phillips being closed underneath the Conway administration, or whether that was St. Luke's, you know, moving out, you know, to the county. You know, we've been seeing this disinvestment, as the Alderwoman from the 5th Ward said, for the last 60 years now. Some could argue even longer than that. You know, Southeast City has been saying, you know, disinvestment for the last 30. So I empathize with where this conversation has been going, but I do have to take exception that if there are parts of the city in the Central Corridor or Southwest City who, you know, think that this is a conversation that shouldn't be had, you know, well, you don't have to have this conversation. Your parts of the city have been fully developed and haven't seen the lack of investment the last several decades. You know, so I think that this is something that, you know, is a responsible conversation on all of our parts, and I hope that we can do so with mutual respect and understanding for everyone too. Thank you.
Any further discussion? Any further discussion? Alderwoman from the 5th, you're recognized to close.
Yes, I would like to renew my motion for final passage of Board Bill 103 as amended.
It's been moved by the Alderman from the 5th, seconded by the Alderman from the 1st, that we third read and finally pass Board Bill 103 as amended. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Alderwoman Tyus. Alderwoman Middlebrook. Alderman Bosley. Alderman Moore. Alderwoman Hubbard. Alderwoman Ingracia. Alderman Kotar. Alderwoman Rice. Alderman Guenther. Alderman Vollmer. Alderwoman Martin. Alderman Arnowitz. Alderwoman Murphy. Alderwoman Howard. Alderwoman Green. Alderman Odenberg. Alderman Rhodey. Alderman Todd. Alderwoman Davis. Alderwoman Spencer. Alderman Muhammad. Alderman Boyd. Alderman Vaccaro. Alderman Narayan. Alderman Cone. Alderwoman Clark Hubbard. Alderwoman Boyd. Alderwoman Navarro. President Reed.
Aye.
Alderwoman Tyus. Alderwoman Middlebrook. Alderman Kotar. Alderwoman Rice. Alderman Odenberg. 23 aye votes, 2 no votes, and 1 present.
By your vote, staying the motion of the Alderwoman from the 5th and third read and finally passed Board Bill 103 as amended.
That is the extent of third reading report of engrossment.
Report of enrollment.
Board Bill 116, Committee Sub. Board Bill 90, Board Bill 85 as amended, Board Bill 112, and Board Bill 103 as amended.
All other business being suspended, the President shall in open session affix his signature hereto to the end that these may become law. Alderman from the 22nd, you recognize on the motion for the courtesy resolutions calendar.
Mr. President, I move for adoption of the courtesy resolution calendar.
Moved by the Alderman from the 22nd, seconded by the Alderman from the 10th. Any discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries. First reading of resolutions.
We have none.
Second reading.
We have none.
Miscellaneous unfinished business.
We have none.
Announcements.
Tuesday, October 22nd, Rules will have a meeting 10 a.m. in the Leisure Room. Personnel will have a meeting at 11:30 a.m. in the Leisure Room. Thursday, October 24th, Ways and Means will have a meeting 10 a.m. in the Leisure Room. Transportation and Commerce will have a meeting at 1:30 p.m. in the Kennedy Room. And Friday, October 25th, is the full board meeting 10 a.m. in the Chambers.
Before we move forward with the rest of the announcements, I want to announce that Alderman Oldenburg, the reason he's not here with us today is because he and his wife gave birth this morning at 3:30 a.m. to their fourth baby. So let's give them a big round of applause and congratulations. Congratulations to both of you. Alderman from the 1st.
President, members of the board, I just wanted to remind you of my request that we set up have a special meeting Wednesday for the Board of Aldermen so that we could try to work on the freeholders agreement and have the weekend to work with the mayor to try to work this out so we can work collaboratively.
Okay. You would like to hold a full board meeting?
Yes, Wednesday.
Wednesday.
Anticipating we will be able to have a meeting for intergovernmental affairs and vote the nominations out collectively and collaboratively with the mayor.
All right, I'll announce that between now and Monday. Also, I left one piece out. The baby's name is Joan Catherine Oldenburg, so make sure we read that into the record. Alderman from the 25th.
Thank you, Mr. President. I wanted to rise and ask if we could have a moment of silence for the passing of Representative Elijah Cummings. As many of us know, he was a stalwart in the U.S. Congress and a pioneer in the civil rights movement and has been a very well-respected member of our country. And so I think it would be appropriate for our board to pause and have a moment of silence for the representative's passing.
I'll let the pastor lead us.
Let's bow your heads for a moment of silence. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman. Alderman from the 4th.
Thank you, Mr. President and members of the board. I'm having an intergovernmental affairs meeting Tuesday at 1 o'clock.
Madam Clerk, please make note of that. Tuesday, 1 o'clock, intergovernmental affairs.
So noted.
Any further announcements? Alderman from the 19th.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of the board. For those who would like to attend Norman Say's memorial, is tomorrow at noon at True Light Baptist Church. Also, we have a basketball game at Matthew Dickey's Boys Club for our local semi-pro basketball team. And so the guild members of the Urban League are sponsoring that night, and we would like for as many people as possible to come out and see this team play. And hopefully, because it's so inexpensive, you bring your family. It's only $5 admission. Children under 10 are free. So it'll be an opportunity for kids to come and see some good basketball. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further announcements? Any further announcements? Any further announcements? Alderman from the 22nd, you recognize on the motion to excuse.
Mr. President, members of the board, I move to excuse the alderman and alderwoman from the 2nd, 7th, and 16th due to necessary absences.
Moved by the Alderman from the 22nd, entertain a second on that motion, seconded by the Alderwoman from the 27th. Any discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries. Alderman from the 22nd, you recognize on the motion to adjourn.
Mr. President, members of the board, I move to adjourn to next Friday, October 25th, 2019.
Moved by the Alderman from the 22nd, seconded by the Alderman from the 10th. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Stand adjourned.